Kidnapped. A true horror story. Introduction. The town of Ravenswood sat in a valley surrounded by ancient forests, their dark canopy casting long shadows even in the brightest daylight. The townsfolk lived quiet, predictable lives, comforted by the belief that nothing bad ever happened there. It was a place of stillness, where traditions and routines held fast, and the outside world felt like a distant memory. Clara was different. A painter and dreamer, she often felt stifled by Ravenswood's dull rhythm. She lived in a small apartment above her art studio on Main Street, filling her days and nights with the smell of turpentine and the strokes of her brush. The townspeople respected her talent, but viewed her as eccentric, a loner who kept to herself. It was late October when the nightmare began. Clara was working late in her studio, putting the finishing touches on a new piece, a surreal landscape of twisting trees and shadowed figures. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. As the clock struck midnight, she decided to call it a night and head home. The streets were empty, the only sound her boots crunching against fallen leaves. She wrapped her coat tighter against the chill, a sense of unease creeping over her. The feeling was subtle at first, like someone watching from the shadows. She quickened her pace, her breath fogging in the cold air. Then she saw it, a van parked at the corner, its engine idling. She barely had time to register the figure emerging from the darkness before a hand clamped over her mouth, a sharp sting on her neck, and everything went black. Chapter 1. The Kidnapping. Clara awoke in darkness, her head pounding and her wrists bound with rough rope. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of mildew. She tried to scream, but a gag muffled her cries. "You're awake," a voice said, low and gravelly. A man stepped into view, his face partially obscured by a hood. His eyes, however, were sharp and intense, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "Don't scream. It won't help." Fear surged through Clara. She struggled against her bindings, but the man simply shook his head. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "But you can't go back. Not now." Clara's muffled protests grew frantic. "You don't understand," he continued, pacing. "I didn't take you to harm you. I took you to protect you." Her eyes widened. Protect her? From what? Chapter 2. The Mansion. Clara was carried, against her will, into an ancient mansion deep within the forest. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its windows dark and lifeless, its walls overgrown with ivy. Inside, the air was colder, and the faint smell of rot lingered. Victor, as he introduced himself, tied her to a chair in what appeared to be a library filled with old, dust-covered books. "You're safer here than out there," he said, gesturing toward the window. "You've been marked. They'll come for you soon." Clara's mind raced. Marked? Who were they? Her fear turned to fury, and she lashed out, her muffled screams filling the room. Victor sighed, removing her gag. "Go ahead. Yell. No one will hear you out here," he said, sitting across from her. "But it'll only attract them faster." Clara spat at him. "You're insane! Let me go!" Victor smirked but said nothing. Chapter 3. The Mansion's Secrets. Over the next few days, Clara's attempts to escape were met with failure. The doors were locked, and Victor always seemed one step ahead. She spent hours wandering the mansion, observing its eerie details, portraits with faces scratched out, a grand piano with yellowed keys, and a strange sigil carved into the floor of the dining hall. One night, Clara stumbled upon a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room. It belonged to the mansion's original owner, a man named Elias Hawthorne. The entries detailed horrifying rituals meant to summon and bind a being known as the Collector. "The Collector takes what it desires," one passage read. "A life for a life, a soul for the void." Chapter 4. The Truth. Victor finally revealed the truth during a tense confrontation. "You were marked the moment you painted that cursed landscape," he said. "The collector doesn't just take random victims. It hunts those who create, artists, musicians, dreamers. Your painting was like a beacon calling it to you." Clara was incredulous. "You're saying I summoned some demon by painting trees?" "It's not just a demon," Victor growled. "It's older than that, and now it wants you." Chapter 5. The haunting begins. Strange phenomena began plaguing Clara. Whispers in the darkness, her reflection moving independently in mirrors, and the sensation of invisible hands brushing against her skin. One night, she awoke to find her painting of the forest had changed. The shadowy figures now had glowing eyes, and they seemed to be reaching out of the canvas. Victor explained that the collector was growing stronger. "You need to destroy the painting," he insisted. But Clara hesitated. Destroying her work felt like losing a part of herself. Chapter 6. The Showdown. The final confrontation came on a stormy night. The collector manifested, its form a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and faces. It spoke in a voice like 1,000 whispers, taunting Clara and Victor. Victor fought valiantly, but the collector overpowered him. Clara, desperate, remembered the journal's instructions to bind the entity using art. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a brush and began painting over the cursed canvas. The creature roared in rage, its form distorting as Clara's strokes trapped it within the painting. With one final cry, it vanished, leaving only silence. Chapter 7. Resolution. Victor was gravely injured but alive. He urged Clara to leave the mansion and never return. "You've done what I couldn't," he said weakly. "You've stopped it, for now." Clara escaped, carrying the cursed painting with her. Back in Ravenswood, she hung the piece in her studio, its malevolent energy now dormant. Epilogue. Years later, Clara became renowned for her haunting artwork. But she never forgot the mansion, Victor, or the collector. And though she had escaped, she often wondered if the entity was truly gone, or merely waiting for its next opportunity. Moral: true courage is facing your fears head-on, even when the odds seem insurmountable. And sometimes, the things we create can take on lives of their own, for better or worse.